Sarah Martinez had always been different from other teachers at Lincoln Elementary School. While her colleagues rushed home after the final bell, she stayed behind, watching the empty playground where broken swings creaked in the evening wind. The school sat in the heart of Riverside, a neighborhood that most people avoided after dark. Graffiti covered the walls, windows were cracked, and the smell of garbage lingered in the hallways. At 28, Sarah could have easily transferred to a better school in the suburbs. Her teaching degree from Columbia University opened doors to prestigious positions with higher pay and safer environments. Her parents constantly reminded her of this during their weekly phone calls from their comfortable home in Connecticut. "You're wasting your talent, mija," her mother would say. "These kids don't appreciate what you're trying to do for them." But Sarah saw something others couldn't see. Behind the tough exteriors and behavioral problems, she recognized the same hunger for knowledge that had driven her own journey from a small town in Mexico to one of America's top universities. These children weren't broken. They were simply forgotten. The statistics were heartbreaking. Riverside Elementary had the lowest test scores in the district. More than 90% of students qualified for free lunch programs. Many came from single-parent homes where working multiple jobs left little time for homework supervision. The dropout rate at the local high school exceeded 60%. Sarah's colleagues meant well, but most had given up trying to make a real difference. They followed the curriculum, managed behavior problems, and counted down the days until retirement. The turnover rate was so high that some students had 3 different teachers in a single year. During her first month at Riverside, Sarah noticed something that would change everything. Many of her 4th-grade students showed up to school without breakfast, their stomachs growling audibly during morning lessons. Some fell asleep at their desks, exhausted from staying up late in overcrowded apartments where multiple families shared small spaces. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in October. 9-year-old Marcus Williams collapsed during recess. When the nurse checked him, they discovered he hadn't eaten anything substantial in 2 days. His mother was working 3 jobs to keep their apartment, often leaving before Marcus woke up and returning after he was asleep. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment, staring at her laptop screen. She had been researching successful education programs in impoverished communities around the world. One story particularly caught her attention. A teacher in rural Kenya who had transformed an entire village by creating a comprehensive support system that addressed not just education, but the basic needs that prevented children from learning. The idea that began forming in Sarah's mind was ambitious beyond anything the school district had ever attempted. She envisioned a program that would provide not just education, but breakfast, after-school care, weekend activities, and family support services. She wanted to create a safe haven where children could thrive regardless of their circumstances at home. Her principal, Mrs. Thompson, was a kind woman who had been at Riverside for 15 years. She had seen many young teachers arrive with big dreams, only to leave frustrated within 2 years. When Sarah approached her with the initial concept, Mrs. Thompson's response was polite but discouraging. "Sarah, I admire your enthusiasm," she said, adjusting her glasses as she reviewed Sarah's hastily written proposal. "But what you're describing would require funding we simply don't have. The district is already cutting programs, not expanding them." Sarah wasn't deterred. She spent her evenings researching grant opportunities, reading about successful community partnerships, and learning about nutrition programs. She discovered that many corporations were looking for meaningful ways to invest in education, but they wanted to see concrete plans with measurable outcomes. Her first breakthrough came when she learned about a federal grant program designed to support innovative approaches to education in underserved communities. The application process was complex, requiring detailed budget projections, community impact assessments, and partnerships with local organizations. Sarah threw herself into the application with the same intensity she had brought to her graduate studies. She interviewed parents, surveyed students, and documented the specific challenges facing the Riverside community. She discovered that many families were recent immigrants who struggled with language barriers. Others dealt with unemployment, inadequate health care, and housing instability. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that traditional education approaches were insufficient. These children needed wraparound services that addressed the root causes of educational failure. They needed mentorship, nutritious meals, safe spaces to study, and connections to community resources. Her research revealed successful models from cities like Boston and Chicago, where schools had partnered with community organizations to provide comprehensive support. Test scores had improved dramatically, graduation rates had increased, and entire neighborhoods had been revitalized. Working late into the night, Sarah crafted a proposal that outlined a 3-year pilot program. The initiative would transform Riverside Elementary into a community hub offering extended learning hours, family engagement programs, health and nutrition services, and partnerships with local businesses and organizations. The budget was substantial, requiring nearly $2 million over 3 years. Sarah knew the amount would shock district administrators, but she had carefully justified every expense. The cost per student was actually lower than many special education programs, and the potential long-term savings from reduced dropout rates and improved community outcomes were enormous. As she submitted the grant application on a cold November evening, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She had just proposed the most ambitious educational transformation in the district's history. If approved, it would require her to step far outside her comfort zone, managing budgets, coordinating with community partners, and leading a team of educators and social workers. Her colleagues thought she was crazy. During lunch conversations in the teacher's lounge, they shared stories of failed initiatives and warned her about the dangers of overpromising to administrators. Some suggested she was naive to think that external funding could solve problems that had persisted for decades, but Sarah remembered Marcus Williams and dozens of other students whose potential was being wasted due to circumstances beyond their control. She thought about the 8-year-old girl who did her homework by candlelight because the electricity had been shut off, and the 10-year-old boy who took care of his younger siblings while his mother worked night shifts. The waiting period for grant decisions would last 4 months. During that time, Sarah continued teaching with renewed purpose, documenting every success story and challenge that reinforced her belief in the program's necessity. She began building relationships with potential community partners, from local churches to business leaders who might support the initiative. What Sarah didn't know was that her proposal had landed on the desk of Dr. Jennifer Chen, a program officer who specialized in education innovation. Dr. Chen had been searching for exactly the kind of comprehensive approach that Sarah had outlined. The proposal's attention to detail, community research, and realistic implementation timeline set it apart from hundreds of other applications. The stage was set for a transformation that would indeed shock everyone and change opinions about what was possible in America's most challenging schools. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning in March, just as Sarah was helping her students with their morning reading exercises. Mrs. Thompson's voice over the intercom was unusually excited, asking Sarah to come to the office immediately. Sarah's heart raced as she walked down the familiar hallway, past the peeling paint and motivational posters that seemed almost ironic given the school's challenges. Dr. Jennifer Chen was waiting in the principal's office, her professional smile barely containing her enthusiasm. She was a small woman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen transformative education programs succeed against impossible odds. Ms. Martinez, Dr. Chen began, I'm pleased to inform you that your grant application has been approved for full funding. $2.1 million over 3 years. The words seemed to echo in the small office. Sarah felt her knees weaken and she had to sit down to process what she had just heard. Mrs. Thompson's mouth hung open in amazement. In all her years at Riverside, she had never seen a grant of this magnitude awarded to their school. There are conditions, of course, Dr. Chen continued, pulling out a thick folder of documents. You'll need to demonstrate measurable progress at 6-month intervals. We'll require detailed reporting on academic outcomes, community engagement, and fiscal responsibility. Most importantly, you'll need to show that this model can be replicated in other schools facing similar challenges. The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a heavy blanket. She had dreamed of this moment for months, but now that it was real, the enormity of the task ahead was almost overwhelming. She would be responsible for managing a team of educators, social workers, nutritionists, and community coordinators. The eyes of the entire district would be watching, waiting to see if her ambitious vision could actually work. News of the grant spread quickly through the school and community. Reactions were mixed and intense. Some teachers were excited about the additional resources and support, while others worried about the increased scrutiny and pressure to perform. Parents had questions about what the changes would mean for their children's daily routines. The most vocal opposition came from an unexpected source. The teachers' union representative, Mr. Davis, who had been at Riverside for 12 years. He called an emergency meeting to discuss his concerns about the program's impact on working conditions and job security. "This sounds good on paper," he told the assembled faculty. "But who's going to be responsible when test scores don't improve overnight? Who's going to take the blame when the media decides this experiment has failed?" Sarah understood his concerns, but she also knew that maintaining the status quo wasn't an option. During the meeting, she shared data about the current state of their students' academic performance and post-graduation outcomes. The numbers were stark and undeniable. "We're already failing these kids," she said quietly. "At least now we have resources to try something different." The summer months became a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah worked with architects to redesign classroom spaces, creating flexible learning environments that could accommodate different teaching styles and group sizes. The cafeteria was expanded to include a community meeting space and a computer lab. A small clinic was established to provide basic health services for students and their families. Hiring the right staff was crucial. Sarah needed people who shared her vision, but also had the practical skills to implement complex programs. She interviewed dozens of candidates for positions ranging from social workers to nutrition coordinators. Each hire had to be someone who could work effectively with children from diverse backgrounds while maintaining high academic standards. Maria Rodriguez became the program's family engagement coordinator. She was a bilingual social worker who had grown up in a neighborhood similar to Riverside. Her ability to connect with parents who were skeptical of school-based programs proved invaluable during the planning phase. Dr. Michael Park joined as the academic coordinator, bringing 15 years of experience in curriculum development for urban schools. His research-based approach to learning helped Sarah design educational programming that was both rigorous and culturally responsive. The nutrition program was led by Chef Antoine Williams, a former restaurant manager who had become passionate about addressing food insecurity in underserved communities. His vision extended beyond simply providing meals to teaching students about healthy eating and even involving them in food preparation. As the new school year approached, Sarah organized community meetings to explain the program changes to parents and neighbors. The response was cautious but hopeful. Many families had been let down by previous promises of improvement, so their skepticism was understandable. Mrs. Garcia, whose 3 children attended Riverside, voiced concerns that many parents shared. "My kids have been going to this school for 4 years. We've heard about new programs before, but nothing ever really changes. How do we know this will be different?" Sarah answered honestly. "You don't know, and neither do I. But what I can promise is that we're going to work harder than anyone has ever worked to make sure your children have every opportunity to succeed. We're not just changing what happens during school hours. We're creating a community where learning happens all day, every day." The physical transformation of the school was dramatic. Fresh paint covered the hallways in bright, welcoming colors. New furniture replaced broken desks and chairs. Technology upgrades included tablets for every student and interactive whiteboards in each classroom. The playground was renovated with new equipment and safety surfaces, but the most significant changes were less visible. Sarah had designed the program around the principle that education couldn't be separated from students' basic needs. The extended day schedule meant that children could arrive as early as 7 in the morning for breakfast and stay until 6 in the evening for homework help and enrichment activities. The weekend programs were particularly innovative. Saturdays featured field trips to museums, libraries, and cultural events that many students had never experienced. Sundays included family programming where parents could attend English classes, job training workshops, or financial literacy sessions while their children participated in recreational activities. Local partnerships were essential to the program's success. The public library system agreed to place a satellite branch in the school. A nearby community college offered tutoring services provided by education students who needed practical experience. Several local businesses committed to providing internship opportunities for older siblings of current students. The most challenging aspect was changing the culture of the school itself. For years, Riverside had operated under a mindset of scarcity and limitation. Teachers had learned to expect minimal resources and maximum bureaucratic obstacles. Students had internalized low expectations about their academic potential. Sarah knew that mindset changes would take time, but she also knew that early successes were crucial for building momentum. She worked with her team to identify students who were most likely to show rapid improvement, not to play favorites, but to create visible examples of what was possible when children received comprehensive support. 10-year-old Destiny Johnson became one of those early success stories. She had been struggling with reading comprehension, partly due to missing many school days when her mother couldn't arrange childcare for her younger brother. The new program provided before and after-school care for both children, eliminating the attendance problem. Individual tutoring helped Destiny catch up academically, and within 2 months, her reading level had improved by a full grade. Marcus Williams, the boy who had collapsed from hunger the previous year, was thriving in the new environment. Regular meals had improved his energy and concentration. The homework support program meant he could complete assignments even when his mother was working late. His grades improved from failing to be average within the first semester. These individual transformations were inspiring, but Sarah knew that sustainable change required broader community engagement. She began documenting every aspect of the program's implementation, knowing that other schools and districts were watching to see if the Riverside model could be replicated elsewhere. 6 months into the program, Sarah faced her first major crisis. The local newspaper had published a scathing editorial questioning the expense of the Riverside transformation. The headline read, "Taxpayer Money Wasted on Feel-Good Education Experiment," and the article suggested that the funds could have been better spent on traditional academic programs across multiple schools. The criticism stung, particularly because it came just as Sarah was preparing her first progress report for Dr. Chen and the grant committee. While individual student success stories were encouraging, the standardized test scores that dominated public education conversations wouldn't be available until spring. Critics argued that millions of dollars were being spent on frills like nutrition programs and family services instead of proven educational interventions. The controversy intensified when City Councilman Robert Hayes called for a public hearing on the program's effectiveness. Hayes had been a longtime critic of what he called social engineering in schools, arguing that educators should focus exclusively on academic instruction rather than trying to solve broader community problems. "We're turning schools into welfare offices," Hayes declared during a televised interview. "These children need to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic, not have their hands held through every aspect of their lives." Sarah knew she had to respond carefully. The public hearing would be her opportunity to defend the program, but it would also give critics a platform to attack her approach. She spent weeks preparing, gathering data not just on academic progress but on attendance rates, behavioral incidents, and family engagement metrics that told a more complete story. The hearing was held in the high school auditorium on a cold February evening. Nearly 300 people attended, including parents, teachers, community leaders, and local media. The atmosphere was tense, with supporters and critics sitting in clearly defined sections. Sarah had asked several families to speak about their experiences with the program. Mrs. Patterson, whose daughter had struggled with chronic absenteeism due to unstable housing, explained how the school's social worker had connected their family with resources that led to permanent housing and consistent school attendance. "My daughter missed 47 days of school last year," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice shaking slightly as she addressed the crowd. "This year she's missed 3 days, and 2 of those were because she was sick. When children have safe places to sleep and enough food to eat, they can focus on learning." 8-year-old Jamie Chen, whose parents both worked night shifts, spoke about the after-school program that had become his safe haven. "Before, I was scared to go home to an empty apartment," he said. "Now I can stay at school until my parents pick me up and I get help with my homework. I'm not scared anymore." But the critics were equally vocal. Mr. Davis, the union representative, raised concerns about teacher workload and the sustainability of the program beyond the 3-year grant period. "What happens to these children when the funding runs out?" he asked. "Are we setting them up for disappointment?" Local business owner Frank Morrison questioned whether the school was exceeding its proper role. "I support helping children learn," he said. "But should schools really be providing social services that other agencies are supposed to handle? Where does it end?" Sarah's response was measured but passionate. She had prepared extensively, armed with research from similar programs across the country and preliminary data from Riverside's own transformation. 6 months ago, our average daily attendance rate was 73%, she began, addressing the packed auditorium. Today, it's 89%. 6 months ago, we had an average of 12 disciplinary incidents per week. This month, we've averaged fewer than 3. She continued with more statistics that painted a picture of dramatic improvement. Emergency room visits for school-aged children in the neighborhood had decreased by 30%, partly due to the on-site health clinic that caught problems early. Parent participation in school events had increased from less than 10% to more than 60%. But the most important changes can't be measured by statistics, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium. They're measured in the confidence of a child who used to be too hungry to concentrate. They're measured in the relief of a parent who knows their child is safe and supported. They're measured in the hope of a community that's beginning to believe change is possible. The hearing lasted nearly 3 hours, with passionate arguments on both sides. When it ended, the community remained divided, but something important had happened. The conversation had shifted from whether the program was worth trying to how it could be improved and sustained. Local media coverage following the hearing was more balanced than the initial criticism. A feature story in the regional paper highlighted the experiences of individual families and included interviews with education experts who supported comprehensive approaches to addressing educational inequality. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a professor of education policy at the State University, provided crucial academic credibility for Sarah's approach. Research consistently shows that children's ability to learn is significantly impacted by factors outside the classroom, she explained in the article. Programs that address these factors holistically tend to produce better long-term outcomes than those that focus exclusively on academic instruction. The controversy had an unexpected positive effect. It brought more attention to the program from education professionals and policymakers across the state. Delegations from other school districts began visiting Riverside to observe the model in action. Sarah found herself invited to speak at education conferences about implementing comprehensive support programs in underserved communities. Meanwhile, the daily work of transformation continued. Spring brought the first standardized test results since the program's implementation, and the data exceeded even Sarah's optimistic projections. Reading scores had improved by an average of 18%, with math scores close behind. More importantly, the achievement gap between Riverside students and the district average had narrowed significantly. But Sarah knew that test scores alone wouldn't be enough to ensure the program's long-term survival. She needed to demonstrate that the model could be financially sustainable beyond the initial grant period. Working with Maria Rodriguez and Dr. Park, she began developing partnerships with local organizations that could gradually assume responsibility. For various program components, the community health center agreed to expand their services to include the school-based clinic. A local nonprofit organization specialized in after-school programming expressed interest in taking over weekend activities. The public library system was already planning to make their satellite branch at Riverside permanent. These partnerships were crucial because they addressed the most common criticism of comprehensive school programs, their dependence on temporary funding. By creating a network of community organizations invested in the school's success, Sarah was building a foundation that could support continued innovation even after the federal grant expired. The transformation was becoming self-sustaining in other ways as well. Property values in the neighborhood around Riverside had begun to increase as young families moved to the area, specifically to access the school's programs. Local businesses reported increased foot traffic as the school became a hub of community activity. Most importantly, the culture of expectations was changing. Students who had previously seen little connection between their education and their future possibilities were beginning to envision different paths for themselves. High school graduation rates for former Riverside students were already showing improvement, and several alumni had returned to volunteer as mentors for current students. As the first year of the program drew to a close, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that rainy Tuesday when Marcus Williams had collapsed from hunger. The boy who had once struggled to stay awake in class was now one of the school's most enthusiastic learners, often staying late to work on special projects. The success was gratifying, But Sarah knew that the real test would come in the program's second and third years. Initial enthusiasm could carry innovative programs for a while, but sustainable change required addressing deeper systemic issues and building institutional capacity that could outlast any single leader's involvement. The second year brought unexpected challenges that tested Sarah's leadership in ways she hadn't anticipated. The success of the Riverside program had attracted national attention, including a feature story in Education Week and a segment on the evening news. While the positive publicity was gratifying, it also brought increased scrutiny and pressure to maintain the momentum. Dr. Chen visited the school in October, accompanied by a team of federal education officials who were considering whether to recommend the Riverside model for nationwide implementation. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility as she guided the delegation through classrooms where engaged. Students worked on collaborative projects that would have been impossible under the previous system. The visitors were impressed by what they saw, but they also raised pointed questions about scalability and cost-effectiveness. Could this model work in rural districts with different demographics? How could the intensive community partnerships be replicated in areas without established nonprofit organizations? What would happen if federal education priorities shifted and funding dried up? These questions kept Sarah awake at night because she didn't have easy answers. The Riverside transformation had been possible, partly because of the specific characteristics of the community and the timing of various funding opportunities. Replicating those exact conditions elsewhere might be impossible. The pressure intensified when Sarah learned that she had been selected to present the Riverside model at the National Education Association's annual conference. Speaking to thousands of educators and policymakers would be the highest profile platform she had ever had. But it also meant that any shortcomings in the program would be exposed to a national audience. As she prepared for the presentation, Sarah decided to be completely honest about both the successes and the ongoing challenges. The program had achieved remarkable results, but it hadn't solved every problem. Some students continued to struggle academically despite the additional support. A few families remained skeptical and hadn't fully engaged with the services offered. One of the most persistent challenges was staff turnover, particularly among support personnel. The intensive nature of the program placed significant demands on teachers and staff members, leading to burnout for some who weren't prepared for the emotional intensity of working closely with families facing multiple crises. Sarah had learned to recognize the signs of compassion fatigue and had implemented regular support sessions for staff members. She brought in a counselor who specialized in helping educators maintain healthy boundaries while still providing compassionate care. These sessions became some of the most valuable professional development the staff received. The winter months brought a different kind of test when the school district faced a budget crisis that threatened all special programs. The new superintendent, Dr. Williams, was under pressure to cut costs and had been vocal about his preference for back-to-basics education approaches. He questioned whether the Riverside model was sustainable given the district's financial constraints. Sarah found herself defending the program not just to external critics but to her own administrative hierarchy. She prepared detailed cost-benefit analyses showing that while the program required significant upfront investment, it was already generating savings in reduced special education referrals, lower truancy rates, and decreased need for disciplinary interventions. The data was compelling, but Sarah knew that numbers alone wouldn't be enough. She needed allies within the district who could advocate for the program's continuation. She began building relationships with school board members, parent organizations, and community leaders who had seen the transformation firsthand. Mrs. Thompson, who had initially been skeptical of Sarah's ambitious plans, became one of the program's strongest advocates. During a heated school board meeting, she spoke passionately about the changes she had witnessed in her 15 years at Riverside. "I've seen a lot of initiatives come and go," she told the board. "This isn't just another program. It's a fundamental shift in how we think about education and community responsibility. The children at Riverside are achieving things we never thought possible." The support from families was equally important. Parents who had initially been hesitant to trust another promise of improvement were now vocal advocates for the program. They organized petition drives, attended board meetings, and shared their stories with local media outlets. Maria Rodriguez, the family engagement coordinator, had been instrumental in building this parent network. She had organized leadership training sessions, that helped parents develop advocacy skills and confidence in speaking with administrators and elected officials. These families know their children better than anyone, Maria explained to a reporter. When they see real changes in their kids' attitudes toward learning and their hopes for the future, they become powerful voices for continuing the programs that made those changes possible. The crisis reached its peak in March when Dr. Williams proposed eliminating the extended day programming and reducing the support staff positions to save money. The proposal would essentially gut the comprehensive approach that was central to the program's success. Sarah knew she had to take a risk. She requested a meeting with the entire school board to present evidence about the program's impact and to propose alternative cost-saving measures that wouldn't compromise the core services. She spent weeks preparing, gathering testimonials from families, academic data from students, and cost projections that showed the long-term financial benefits of the program. The presentation took place on a rainy Thursday evening in the district's main conference room. Board members sat around a large table while parents, teachers, and community members filled chairs along the walls. The atmosphere was tense, with everyone understanding that the future of the program hung in the balance. Sarah began with the story of Marcus Williams, the boy whose collapse from hunger had sparked her initial vision. She showed before and after photos of the school, shared academic achievement data, and presented testimonials from families whose lives had been transformed by the comprehensive support services. But the most powerful moment came when 12-year-old Destiny Johnson, now a confident sixth grader, stood up to address the board directly. Her mother had helped her prepare remarks, but Destiny's words came from her own experience. "Before this program, I hated school," she said, her clear voice carrying across the silent room. "I was hungry a lot and I couldn't concentrate on my work. I thought I was stupid because I couldn't keep up with the other kids. Now I know I'm smart and I want to go to college someday. Please don't take away the things that helped me believe in myself." Other students followed Destiny's example, sharing their own stories of transformation. 10-year-old Carlos talked about how the after-school program had kept him safe while his mother worked. 8-year-old Aisha explained how the reading tutors had helped her discover a love of books. The impact on the board members was visible. These weren't statistics or theoretical arguments. They were real children whose lives had been changed by the program's comprehensive approach. Board member Jennifer Walsh, who had been among the most skeptical about the program's cost, asked pointed questions about the specific services that had made the biggest difference for individual students. Sarah answered honestly, acknowledging that not every component of the program was equally essential. She proposed a modified model that would maintain the core services, while reducing some of the more expensive elements. The breakfast and lunch programs would continue, as would the after-school care and family support services. Weekend programming would be reduced but not eliminated. The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours, with board members asking detailed questions about implementation, costs, and measurable outcomes. Parents spoke during the public comment period, many of them sharing personal stories about how the program had affected their families. When the board finally voted, the decision was unanimous. The program would continue with the modifications Sarah had proposed. The vote was accompanied by a commitment to seek additional funding sources that could restore some of the reduced services in future years. The victory was sweet, but Sarah knew it was just one battle in a longer campaign. The program had survived its first major political challenge, but she needed to continue building the kind of deep, community support that would make future attacks less likely to succeed. She also realized that the controversy had clarified something important about her own role. She wasn't just implementing an education program. She was leading a movement that challenged fundamental assumptions about the role of schools in addressing social inequality. That realization was both exciting and daunting, because it meant her work would always be political as well as educational. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in May, bearing the official seal of the U.S. Department of Education. Sarah stared at the elegant letterhead, reading the words 3 times before their meaning fully registered. Secretary of Education Maria Santos was requesting her presence at a national symposium on innovative education models, where she would be one of only 12 educators presenting their programs to a distinguished panel of policymakers, researchers, and foundation leaders. The symposium, scheduled for late June in Washington, D.C., would bring together the most promising educational innovations from across the country. Sarah's presentation would be evaluated, not just for its local impact, but for its potential to influence federal education policy and funding priorities for the next decade. Mrs. Thompson found Sarah sitting in her classroom after school, staring at the invitation with a mixture of excitement and terror. "This is what you've been working toward," the principal said gently. "The whole country needs to hear about what you've accomplished here." But Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the opportunity. Speaking to fellow educators was one thing. Presenting to federal policymakers who could shape the future of American education was entirely different. The weight of representing not just Riverside Elementary, but the entire community-based education movement felt enormous. She decided to involve her students and their families in preparing for the presentation. If she was going to advocate for their model, they should help tell their own stories. Working with Maria Rodriguez and Dr. Park, Sarah organized a series of preparation sessions where students, parents, and staff members could contribute to the narrative she would share in Washington. The sessions revealed aspects of the program's impact that Sarah had never fully appreciated. Parents talked about how their own confidence had grown as they became more involved in their children's education. Several mothers mentioned that the English classes offered through the Family Engagement Program had helped them find better jobs. Fathers spoke about learning to help with homework in ways they had never been able to before. The students' perspectives were equally illuminating. They didn't just talk about improved grades or test scores. They talked about feeling safe, valued, and hopeful about their futures. Many mentioned specific moments when they realized that adults at the school genuinely cared about their well-being beyond their academic performance. 15-year-old Miguel Santos, who had graduated from Riverside the previous year and was now excelling in high school, volunteered to help Sarah understand the long-term impact of the program. Miguel had been one of the most challenging students during the program's early days, frequently getting into fights and skipping classes. The difference wasn't just the extra help with schoolwork, Miguel explained during one of the preparation sessions. It was that people here treated me like I had potential, even when I didn't believe it myself. Ms. Rodriguez didn't give up on me when I got suspended. Chef Williams taught me to cook, which gave me something to be proud of. Dr. Park helped me see that being smart wasn't something to be ashamed of. Miguel's transformation had been gradual but profound. The mentorship and support he received at Riverside had helped him develop the confidence and academic skills needed to succeed in high school. He was now planning to attend community college with the goal of becoming a teacher himself. As Sarah worked on her presentation, she realized that the most powerful aspect of the Riverside model wasn't any single innovation, but rather the way different elements worked together to create a comprehensive support system. The nutrition program wasn't just about feeding hungry children. It was about removing barriers to learning while teaching families about healthy living. The after-school programming wasn't just childcare. It was an extension of the learning day that provided safe, enriching environments for academic and social development. The community partnerships weren't just resource-sharing arrangements. They were expressions of shared responsibility for children's success that extended far beyond the school's walls. Local businesses, religious organizations, healthcare providers, and social service agencies had all become stakeholders in the educational process. 3 weeks before the symposium, Sarah received news that would significantly strengthen her presentation. The preliminary results from the program's second year showed even more dramatic improvements than the first year's data. Reading and math scores had continued to climb, with Riverside students now performing at or above district averages in most areas. More importantly, the achievement gap that had historically separated low-income students from their more affluent peers had narrowed considerably. Students who had entered the program significantly behind grade level were now meeting or exceeding academic standards. The transformation was particularly striking among English language learners, who benefited from the program's culturally responsive teaching methods and family engagement strategies. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, an independent researcher from the State University, had been conducting a longitudinal study of the program's impact. Her preliminary findings, which Sarah would be able to reference in her presentation, showed improvements not just in academic outcomes but in social-emotional development, family stability, and community engagement. What we're seeing at Riverside challenges fundamental assumptions about educational inequality, Dr. Rodriguez explained during a meeting to review her findings. The traditional approach has been to blame poor academic performance on factors outside the school's control. This program demonstrates that schools can actually address those factors directly and achieve remarkable results. The week before her departure for Washington, Sarah faced an unexpected personal crisis that threatened to derail her participation in the symposium. Her mother in Connecticut suffered a mild heart attack and was hospitalized. Sarah's first instinct was to cancel her trip and fly home to be with her family. But her mother, speaking from her hospital bed during a phone call, wouldn't hear of it. "Mija, this is your moment to change things for children everywhere," she said, her voice weak but determined. "I'll be fine, but those children need you to tell their story." The support came from unexpected quarters as well. The entire Riverside community seemed to understand the importance of Sarah's presentation. Parents organized to send her off with a collection of handwritten letters from students, expressing their gratitude and hopes for the future. Local businesses contributed to help cover her travel expenses. Even former critics like Councilman Hayes publicly wished her well, acknowledging that the program had exceeded his initial expectations. The flight to Washington was Sarah's first time traveling alone for professional purposes. As the plane lifted off, she felt the weight of representing not just her school but thousands of children in similar circumstances across the country. She carried with her a folder containing photos of every student in the program, along with their handwritten messages of encouragement. The symposium was held in a grand hotel near the Capitol, with education leaders from across the nation gathering to share innovative approaches to persistent challenges. Sarah felt intimidated walking into the elegant conference rooms where conversations buzzed about federal funding formulas, assessment strategies, and policy implications, but her nervousness disappeared when she met some of the other presenters. Dr. James Mitchell from rural Montana had developed a program that used technology to bring advanced courses to isolated communities. Lisa Chen from urban Detroit had created a model that transformed vacant lots into outdoor classrooms and community gardens. Each presenter had faced similar challenges in convincing skeptics that unconventional approaches could produce extraordinary results. Sarah's presentation was scheduled for the second day of the symposium. She had rehearsed countless times, but standing before the panel of distinguished experts, she decided to abandon her prepared remarks and speak from the heart about the children whose lives had been transformed. She began with Marcus Williams, describing his collapse from hunger and his subsequent transformation into a confident, academically successful student. She shared Destiny Johnson's journey from struggling reader to aspiring college student. She talked about Miguel Santos's evolution from troubled elementary student to high school leader planning a career in education. "These aren't just success stories," Sarah told the panel. "They're examples of what becomes possible when we stop seeing poverty as an excuse for educational failure and start seeing it as a challenge that comprehensive support can address." The questions that followed her presentation were probing but respectful. Panel members wanted to understand the specific mechanisms that had produced such dramatic results. They asked about cost-effectiveness, sustainability, and the challenges of replicating the model in different contexts. Dr. Michelle Washington, a prominent education researcher, asked the question that Sarah had been anticipating. How do you respond to critics who argue that schools shouldn't be responsible for addressing social problems that other institutions have failed to solve? Sarah's answer drew on 2 years of experience defending and refining her approach. I would. Innovation. Riverside maintained continuity and leadership, while gaining access to university resources and research support. Sarah could pursue her broader goals while remaining connected to the community that had shaped her understanding of transformative education. Dr. Park was promoted to principal, bringing deep knowledge of the program's academic components along with genuine respect for the community partnerships that were central to its success. Maria Rodriguez became the assistant principal, ensuring that family engagement remained a priority, even as leadership responsibilities shifted. The transition was carefully planned to minimize disruption for students and families. Sarah spent the summer working with her successors to document institutional knowledge, strengthen community relationships, and establish systems that could function effectively without her daily presence. On her last official day as program director, Sarah walked through the transformed hallways of Riverside Elementary, remembering the broken swings and peeling paint that had greeted her 4 years earlier. The physical changes were dramatic, but the cultural transformation was even more profound. Students moved through the building with confidence and purpose. Teachers collaborated naturally across grade levels and subject areas. Parents were visible throughout the school, participating in everything from classroom instruction to policy decisions. Most importantly, the school had become a genuine community hub where learning happened at all hours and involved entire families. The extended day programming now served more than 300 children. Weekend activities regularly drew hundreds of family members. The health clinic provided services to residents throughout the neighborhood. Marcus Williams, now a confident sixth grader preparing for middle school, had asked to speak at Sarah's farewell gathering. Standing before the assembled crowd of students, parents, teachers, and community partners, he spoke with the poise of someone who had learned to see himself as capable and valued. Ms. Martinez taught us that school isn't just a building where we come to learn reading and math, he said, his clear voice carrying across the packed auditorium. She taught us that school is a place where people care about our whole lives, not just our test scores. She taught us that we can succeed if we have the right support, and that we deserve that support just because we're human beings with potential. As Sarah listened to Marcus speak, she reflected on how much her own understanding of education had evolved. She had started with a vision of providing basic academic support to underserved children. She had ended up creating a model that redefined the relationship between schools, families, and communities in ways that could influence education policy for generations to come. 5 years after Sarah Martinez first submitted her ambitious grant proposal, she stood before the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization in Paris, delivering a keynote address about comprehensive education models to delegates from 47 countries. The young teacher who had once worried about hungry children in a neglected elementary school was now influencing global education policy. The invitation to speak at UNESCO had come through her work at Columbia University, where the Center for Comprehensive Education had become a leading research institution studying holistic approaches to educational inequality. Under Sarah's direction, the center had documented successful implementations of community-based education models in 12 states and 4 countries, creating an evidence base that was reshaping how educators thought about school reform. But even as she addressed an international audience about scaling innovative education practices, Sarah's thoughts remained anchored to the students and families of Riverside Elementary. Every policy recommendation she made, every research study she supervised, every teacher she trained was informed by the relationships she had built during those transformative years in the small urban school. The Riverside model had indeed shocked everyone and changed opinions, but not in ways that Sarah could have predicted when she first envisioned providing breakfast and after-school care for hungry children. The program had evolved into something much more significant, a demonstration that American public education could be fundamentally reimagined to serve all children effectively, regardless of their socioeconomic circumstances. The ripple effects continued to expand in unexpected directions. Destiny Johnson, the shy girl who had struggled with reading in 4th grade, was now a sophomore at the State University studying elementary education. She visited Riverside regularly as a volunteer, tutor, and had already been accepted into the teacher preparation program that Sarah had helped design at Columbia. Miguel Santos had completed his associate degree and was preparing to transfer to a 4-year university to pursue a bachelor's degree in social work. His goal was to return to Riverside as a family engagement coordinator, continuing the cycle of community investment that had become central to the program's sustainability. Marcus Williams, the boy whose hunger-induced collapse had crystallized Sarah's initial vision, was now an honor student at the local high school. He had been selected for a summer research program at the State University, where he was studying nutrition policy and its impact on academic achievement. His senior project proposal outlined a plan for implementing school-based health clinics in rural communities, extending the Riverside model to underserved areas that faced different but equally challenging obstacles to educational success. The academic outcomes that had initially justified the program's continuation remained impressive. Riverside students consistently outperformed district averages on standardized tests. But more importantly, they demonstrated higher levels of social-emotional development, critical thinking skills, and community engagement than their peers at traditional schools. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's longitudinal study now in its sixth year, had documented improvements that extended far beyond individual academic achievement. Families who participated in the program's comprehensive services showed increased economic stability, better health outcomes, and stronger civic engagement. The neighborhood around Riverside had experienced measurable improvements in property values, business development, and community safety. These broader impacts had attracted attention from urban planning researchers, public health specialists, and economists who recognized that the education intervention was actually a comprehensive community development strategy. Several cities were now implementing Riverside-inspired approaches that used schools as anchor institutions for neighborhood revitalization. The success had also generated its share of ongoing challenges and critics. Some education traditionalists continued to argue that schools should focus exclusively on academic instruction rather than trying to address social problems. Budget-conscious policymakers questioned the cost-effectiveness of comprehensive programs compared to targeted interventions. Sarah had learned to engage these critiques constructively, using them to refine and strengthen the model rather than simply defending it. The Research Center at Columbia had developed sophisticated cost-benefit analyses that demonstrated the long-term economic advantages of comprehensive approaches. They had also created differentiated implementation frameworks that allowed schools to adopt core principles while adapting specific strategies to their available resources. Perhaps most importantly, Sarah had helped build a network of educators, researchers, and policymakers who shared a commitment to addressing educational inequality through systemic rather than superficial interventions. This network included former skeptics who had been convinced by evidence of the model's effectiveness, as well as new advocates who brought fresh perspectives and innovative ideas. The annual Riverside reunion had become a significant event that drew hundreds of former students, families, and staff members back to celebrate the ongoing transformation. This year's reunion was particularly special because it marked the 5th anniversary of the program's launch and coincided with Sarah's return from her UNESCO speaking engagement. Walking through the familiar hallways, Sarah was struck by how naturally the comprehensive approach had become embedded in the school's culture. New teachers were mentored by veterans who had been part of the original transformation. Students moved seamlessly between academic classes, health services, enrichment activities, and family engagement programming. Parents participated in school governance with the confidence that comes from being genuine partners in the educational process. Dr. Park, now in his 3rd year as principal, had continued expanding the model's reach while maintaining its core principles. The school was piloting a program for pregnant and parenting teens that provided childcare, parenting education, and academic support. They had also launched a community college partnership that allowed high school students to earn college credits while receiving the wraparound services that had proven so effective. For younger children, Maria Rodriguez had completed her doctorate in educational leadership and was being recruited by other districts to help implement comprehensive programs. Her expertise in family engagement had become legendary among educators working in diverse communities, and she frequently traveled across the country to train teachers and administrators. The evening reunion celebration was held in the school's multi-purpose room, which had been expanded twice to accommodate the growing community events. Sarah listened as speaker after speaker shared stories about how the Riverside experience had shaped their lives and aspirations. Mrs. Garcia, whose initial skepticism had gradually transformed into enthusiastic support, spoke about how the program had changed her entire family's relationship with education. "My older children attended this school before the changes," she said, addressing the packed room. "They got through, but they never learned to love learning. My youngest children don't just go to school. They belong to a community that believes in their potential." Chef Antoine Williams, who had left his restaurant career to lead the nutrition program, had become a local celebrity, whose healthy cooking classes were attended by families throughout the district. He spoke about the joy of watching children discover that nutritious food could be delicious and that cooking skills could build confidence and cultural pride. The reunion's highlight was a presentation by the current 5th grade class, who had researched the school's transformation and created a multimedia presentation about the changes they had witnessed. Their analysis was sophisticated, incorporating interviews with community members, statistical comparisons with other schools, and thoughtful reflections on the relationship between comprehensive support and academic achievement. 10-year-old Isabella Chen, whose parents both worked night shifts, spoke with remarkable poise about how the program had affected her education. "I used to think school was just something I had to do," she said. "Now I understand that school is preparing me to make a difference in the world. The adults here don't just teach us subjects. They teach us that we matter and that our dreams are worth pursuing." As Sarah listened to Isabella speak, she reflected on the unexpected trajectory that had brought her from a classroom teacher concerned about individual students to an international advocate for comprehensive education reform. The journey had required her to develop skills she had never imagined needing: grant writing, budget management, policy analysis, media relations, and community organizing. But at its core, her work remained grounded in the same principle that had motivated her original vision. Every child deserves access to the conditions necessary for academic and personal success. The Riverside model had simply demonstrated that schools could create those conditions when they embraced responsibility for addressing the full range of factors that influence learning. Looking around the room filled with students, families, educators, and community partners who had been transformed by their shared commitment to comprehensive education, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The remarkable mission that had shocked everyone and changed opinions was no longer remarkable at all. It had become a new normal that other communities were working to replicate. The real measure of success wasn't the national recognition, the policy influence, or even the impressive academic outcomes. It was the confidence in Isabella Chen's voice as she spoke about her dreams, the pride in Marcus Williams's plan to study nutrition policy, the determination in Destiny Johnson's commitment to becoming a teacher. The program had succeeded because it had helped children see themselves as capable, valued, and responsible for contributing to their communities. As the reunion celebration continued late into the evening, Sarah knew that the transformation she had helped initiate would continue long after her direct involvement ended. The students, families, and educators who had experienced comprehensive education would carry its principles into their own communities, creating ripple effects that might eventually touch millions of children whose potential was waiting to be unlocked.